When Lucille Ball spoke the words she had never said on television, Johnny Carson froze completely. The cameras kept rolling, but America's most confident talk show host had lost his voice. His hands, usually animated with gestures, fell still on his desk. The studio audience, sensing something profound had just happened, held their breath. For 47 minutes every weeknight, Johnny Carson controlled the rhythm of American television. But on this particular evening in 1974, time itself seemed to pause. The Tonight Show's familiar theme had played. Doc Severinsen's trumpet had announced another night of comedy and conversation. Ed McMahon had delivered his thunderous introduction. But what happened next would be remembered by everyone in that Burbank studio for the rest of their lives. How did we get here? How did the woman who had never spoken certain words in decades of television suddenly break her own unwritten rule? And why did it leave Johnny Carson, the master of quick wit and perfect timing, completely speechless? It started 3 hours before taping, in the green and gold hallway outside Johnny's dressing room. Lucille Ball had arrived early, as she always did, clutching a small leather purse that contained something no one expected. She had agreed to appear on The Tonight Show to promote her latest project, but hidden inside that purse was a letter she had carried for 6 months. A letter that would change everything. Johnny was reviewing his note cards when his assistant knocked. "Lucy's here," she said softly. "She's asking if she can have a moment before the show." This was unusual. In their 20-year friendship, Lucy had never requested private time before an appearance. She was professional, punctual, and always ready to perform. But something in her assistant's voice suggested this night would be different. When Johnny opened his dressing room door, he saw Lucille Ball as he had never seen her before. Gone was the animated Lucy Ricardo energy. Gone was the theatrical presence that had commanded television for decades. Instead, she stood quietly, her hands folded, her famous red hair perfectly styled but her eyes carrying a weight that makeup couldn't conceal. "Johnny," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. "I need to tell you something tonight. Something I've never said on television. Something I've never said to anyone, really." She paused, looking down at her purse. "It's about Desi. It's about the end. And I think it's time." Johnny studied her face. In all their years of friendship, through all the guest appearances and chance encounters at industry events, Lucy had never spoken about the painful details of her divorce from Desi Arnaz. She had maintained the facade, protected the legacy of "I love Lucy," kept the private pain private. But something had changed. "Are you sure?" Johnny asked, knowing that once certain words were spoken on television, they could never be taken back. Lucy nodded, and for just a moment, Johnny saw something he had never seen before: vulnerability without performance. This wasn't Lucy the character or Lucy the star. This was Lucille, the woman behind decades of laughter, ready to share something real. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. The show began as it always did. Johnny delivered his opening monologue with perfect timing, the audience laughed in all the right places, and Ed McMahon provided his reliable support. When the time came to introduce Lucy, Johnny's voice carried its usual warmth. "My next guest needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway." Lucy walked onto the set to thunderous applause, but Johnny noticed something the audience couldn't see. Her smile was genuine, but her hands were trembling slightly. As she settled into the guest chair, she placed her small leather purse on the side table, a subtle signal between old friends. The conversation started lightly. They talked about her new television movie, shared stories from the early days of television, laughed about mutual friends in Hollywood. The audience was enjoying every moment, unaware that something deeper was building beneath the surface. Then, during a break for commercials, Lucy leaned forward slightly and said, "Johnny, remember what we talked about earlier?" Johnny nodded, and when they came back from the break, he did something unprecedented. Instead of continuing with his prepared questions, he set aside his note cards and looked directly into Lucy's eyes. "Lucy," he said, his voice taking on a different quality, You've given America so much joy over the years. But I have a feeling there's something you want to share that goes beyond the laughter." The studio audience sensed the shift immediately. This wasn't the usual banter. This was something else entirely. Lucy was quiet for a long moment. She reached for her purse, opened it, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her hands weren't trembling anymore. They were steady, determined. "Johnny," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I've been carrying this letter for 6 months. It's from Desi. He wrote it to me just before he died, but I never read it on the air because it contains words I swore I'd never say on television." The camera operators, the sound technicians, even Doc Severinsen in the background, everyone stopped what they were doing. In 47 years of live television, nothing quite like this had ever happened on The Tonight Show. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny leaned forward, his interviewer instincts kicking in, but his friend instincts taking precedence. "Lucy, are you sure you want to do this? Here? Now?" "I'm sure," she said, unfolding the letter. "Because this isn't just about me and Desi. This is about love and forgiveness, and the words we never say when we have the chance." She began to read. "Lucille, mi amor, I know we couldn't make it work as husband and wife, but I need you to know." And then Lucy stopped reading from the letter and looked directly into Johnny's eyes. "He wrote that he was sorry," she said, her voice beginning to crack. "But Johnny, the words I've never said on television, the words that have been locked in my heart for 15 years, are these: I forgave him long before he asked. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed." The words hung in the air like something sacred. Johnny Carson, who had interviewed presidents and movie stars, who had navigated the most delicate conversations in American entertainment, found himself at a loss for words. But it wasn't professional embarrassment, it was recognition of a moment too profound for quick wit or clever responses. Lucy continued, "I spent so many years being angry, Johnny. Angry at the affairs, angry at the drinking, angry at the way our marriage fell apart so publicly. But carrying that anger, it was like carrying a stone in my chest every single day." The studio was absolutely silent. The audience, who had come expecting Lucy's famous physical comedy and Johnny's sharp humor, were witnessing something entirely different, the dismantling of a public persona to reveal the human being underneath. "And the words I never said," Lucy whispered, "the words I wish I had said to him while he was alive, were simply, I understand why you couldn't love me the way I needed to be loved. And that's okay." Johnny's eyes filled with tears. Not the crocodile tears of television sentiment, but real tears of someone witnessing authentic human courage. He reached across and took Lucy's hand, something he rarely did with guests. "Lucy," he said, his famous voice reduced to almost a whisper, "those might be the most beautiful words ever spoken on this show." But Lucy wasn't finished. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her purse. "There's something else, Johnny. Something I've never told anyone." Johnny waited, the entire studio waited, and somewhere in homes across America, people leaned closer to their television sets, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "The night before Desi died," Lucy said, "he called me. We talked for 3 hours. And at the end of that call he said, 'Lucy, do you think there's a way for two people to love each other completely and still not be able to live together?' And I told him yes. I told him that sometimes love isn't enough to fix what life has broken." She paused, looking down at her hands, then back up at Johnny. "And then he said the words that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. I love you, Lucy. I always loved you. I just couldn't love myself enough to be the husband you deserved." But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny Carson did something that had never happened in the history of The Tonight Show. He stood up, walked around his desk, and sat on the arm of Lucy's chair. Not for comedy, not for effect, but as a friend offering comfort to another friend sharing the deepest pain of her life. "What did you say to him?" Johnny asked softly. Lucy smiled for the first time since she began her story, a smile of profound peace. "I said, Desi, I loved you enough for both of us. And that was never your burden to carry." The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual Tonight Show applause. It was something deeper, recognition, catharsis, the sound of people witnessing genuine human connection. Doc Severinson's eyes were wet behind his glasses. Ed McMahon wiped his face with his handkerchief. Johnny sat back down, but he didn't return to his usual position behind the desk. He stayed close, maintaining the intimacy of the moment. "Lucy, why did you choose to share this tonight? Why here?" Lucy straightened in her chair, and for a moment the performer returned, but now backed by the authenticity of what she had just shared. "Because, Johnny, I'm 73 years old. I've made people laugh for 50 years. But I realize that maybe the greatest gift I can give isn't another pratfall or another funny face. Maybe it's permission for people to forgive others and themselves." She looked directly into the camera, speaking not to Johnny but to everyone watching. "If you're carrying anger, if you're holding on to hurt, if there are words you've never said because pride or pain is holding them back, life is so short. Love is so precious. And forgiveness is the only thing that ever really sets us free." Johnny was quiet for a long moment. The producers in the booth were frantically signaling about time, about commercials, about the careful schedule that governed live television. But Johnny ignored them all. "Lucy," he said finally, "in 20 years of doing this show, I've never heard anything more important than what you just said." Lucy reached into her purse one more time and pulled out something else, a small, faded photograph. "This is the last picture Desi and I took together, just the two of us, without the cameras, without the show. We're both laughing about something silly, and we look like kids again." She handed the photograph to Johnny, who studied it carefully. "I want to leave this with you," she said, "because I want you to remember that even when love changes form, even when marriage ends, even when people can't live together anymore, if there was ever real love there, it never really dies. It just transforms." Johnny looked at the photograph, then at Lucy, then made a decision that would be talked about for decades. He held up the photograph to the camera, letting America see this private moment between two people who had loved each other imperfectly but genuinely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is what love looks like when it grows up. This is what forgiveness looks like when it becomes real." The show ended not with Johnny's usual golf swing or a wave to the audience, but with Lucy and Johnny sitting quietly, the photograph between them, as the credits rolled in silence except for Doc Severinson's softly played trumpet. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Johnny sat alone in his dressing room, still holding the photograph Lucy had given him. His assistant knocked quietly. "Johnny? The car's here." But Johnny didn't move. He was staring at the photograph, thinking about his own marriages, his own words left unspoken, his own opportunities for forgiveness that he had let slip away. The next morning, the phone calls started. Viewers calling the network, not to complain, but to thank them for broadcasting something real. Letters arrived by the thousands, people sharing their own stories of forgiveness, their own words left unspoken, their own transformations inspired by what they had witnessed. The photograph Lucy gave Johnny was framed and hung not in his office, but in his home, next to his own family pictures. Years later, when Johnny retired from The Tonight Show, he would tell people that Lucy's appearance that night had taught him something about the difference between entertainment and truth, between making people laugh and helping people heal. Lucille Ball died 17 years later, but the words she spoke that night, the words she had never said on television before, became part of television history. Not because they were funny or shocking or scandalous, but because they were true. And Johnny Carson, the master of perfect timing, learned that sometimes the most perfect timing of all is simply knowing when to stop talking and let love speak for itself. The Tonight Show continued for 18 more years, but Johnny would later say that no interview, no comedy bit, no celebrity appearance ever meant more to him than the night Lucille Ball chose to share her heart with America. It was the night he learned that the most powerful words on television aren't the ones that make people laugh. They're the ones that make people free.